Hello, a warm welcome to the program. My name is Felicity Ezewuike. COP29, the annual United Nations meeting on climate change, began yesterday in Azerbaijan. As with every meetup like this, we question what is in it for Africa. This is primarily because the continent bears the brunt of extreme weather caused by the world's changing climate, and there are high expectations that governments will use COP29 to demand more grants to help them adapt to climate change caused largely by countries in the global north. In the run-up to COP29, African academics advocated a more united front by African countries to better negotiate strongly for more climate change adaptation grants and fewer loans. They say without robust commitments from public financial institutions, Africa will continue to face the dual crisis of climate vulnerability and debt. There is also talk about the urgency to get serious about training green talent. Without them, renewable energy projects cannot get off the ground fast enough to make a real difference to global warming. We will be discussing all of these and more as it relates to the ongoing meeting on climate change. My guests are Honorable Terseer Ugbor, member of Nigeria's House of Representatives. We'll be joined later by Onyenkachi Kingsley Anumata, Executive Director of Ecoverse Green Initiative from Abuja. Currently, we have Ruth Soronnadi, lead partner and at LuxHouse Attorneys and Solicitors. She is also a climate policy consultant. She joins us from Enugu. Gentleman and lady, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I will start with you, Ruth. Let's get your perspective. Another climate change meeting. What's your overview of what impact or success these meetings have had on finding solutions to climate change?
Thank you, Felicity. It's my pleasure to be here. Well, I would zero in on the COP29 that it's ongoing. We've had a number of these meetings. It's been continuous over the years. And I believe that in as much as we've not gotten where we need to be, but we are not necessarily where we used to be. And I'm a firm believer in little movement as opposed to no movement. In this COP29, the goal now is to revisit the climate finance policies, okay? And this is very, very important when you think about the fact that African nations, particularly nations in the global south, are being disadvantaged by their limited physical space. Their limited physical space as it concerns finances. So I see this and such other conferences, but particularly the COP29 as an opportunity to table our needs. And one of it is for a reform on climate finance policy, which is very which is invaluable to sustainable development. This year, one of the things that African nations are really pushing forth is we no longer want tokenistic obligations with respect to climate finance. We want concise, clear commitments towards this. And I believe that we're on our way to achieve this with a conference like this COP29.
Ruth, there's been a lot of talk about climate finance, and the push this time that is being advocated is away from loans and more to grants. But we'll come and explore that aspect with you in a bit. Let's bring in the Honorable. Do you align with Ruth's submission as to the continuing relevance of meetings like this?
Well, thank you very much for having me once again. Yes, I believe that meetings are important. It's important to continue to talk on the dialogue on the issues that have to do with climate change and adaptation, mitigation, especially for developing nations like ours, Nigeria. The challenges we face as a result of climate change are enormous, and they cannot be solved in an isolated way. So it's important that the discussions continue. It's important that we continue to put pressure on the the developed world, who are the major polluters and who have historically contributed more to the change in the climate, by emissions and all the activities, industrial activities that go on there for 100 years. And so, yes, I believe that COP, it's important. Discussions are important, but most importantly, I think there's need to emphasize the importance of climate finance and easing the access to climate finance for developing countries to ensure that we take proper advantage, and the purpose for which these funding opportunities are made available don't just become don't remain on paper, but actually can be adopted and can be accessed by developing countries, and projects that have proper impact on the lives of people and actually make a change in our communities are actually executed through these global funds that have been announced and have been announced several times since after the Paris Agreement.
We hear all this announcement, but does the money actually get to those that need it for effective utilization? That's part of the questions I'll be asking. But before we talk about the financing aspect of things, there are certain things I'd like you to clear. I'll stay with you, Honorable. I understand both of these terms are important, but which takes precedence for Africa? Climate mitigation or climate change, climate adaptation, I beg your pardon. What is the difference? There seemed to be some kind of beef regarding this amongst climate advocates and conspiracy theorists.
Yes, climate mitigation refers to the process of combating the change, stopping or mitigating against the continuous change in our climate by changing our habits, by improving our industrial processes to reduce the amount of greenhouse emissions, by planting more trees. For example, in Nigeria, the desertification is a major problem here. Drought is a major problem. So we need to plant more trees so we can reduce and mitigate the effects of climate change on our environment and our societies. Adaptation refers to the process of helping people who are most affected to adapt to the climate, to the changing climate. How do we support communities? How do we support their livelihoods? How do we support farmers? How do we support communities living in the coastal area so that they can adapt to the change in climate, which is actually inevitable? So these are two different concepts, and they're both very important. Now we have a situation where there needs to be a lot of adapting to do. Because the change is happening and it's happening very fast. And so if we don't adapt fast enough, then the change catches up with us and we find ourselves in a situation where we are stuck in no man's land, so to say, where we are unable to make the necessary changes in our lives, in our livelihoods, and to set up our communities in a way that are resilient to the effects of climate change.
Okay, I just needed you to clarify on that, because in the course of preparing for this conversation, I saw a lot of back and forth between which should take priority. The global north is pushing more towards mitigation than adaptation. If we have time, I would also want you to speak on that. Let's come back to Ruth and look at, aside the climate financing conversation, what are some key objectives for Africa at COP29 that you think is urgently needed to be pushed forward?
Okay, I would talk about three. The first is that's the loss and damage funding, which is really very necessary because, like I said earlier, Africa or countries in the global south are really tired of that's just on paper commitments. The developed countries some years back made a commitment of at least 100 billion USD per year to help developed countries or countries affected by this climate change to adapt. So, and in this COP, the focus now it's on revisiting this these goals through the UCQ. That's we want to the goal is to revisit this climate finance commitments Okay, that's the first one, and then the next one is debt relief options. Okay, so we have this debt for climate swap, which is okay instead of our debts, because a lot of countries in the global south have accumulated this. Have accumulated debts over time in trying to provide solutions to effects of climate change. So we want to also present this debt for debt for nature swap. That's one of the goals. And then another thing that's the developing countries are also looking to bring forth in this COP, it's also policy reforms. So it's been noticed over time that countries in the global south usually have difficulties in accessing finances for climate change adaptation. And this is because of it's understandable that these things might not be readily given to them because of their risk threshold. So we want that to revisit the policy reforms on it to make loans, not loans now, finance basically accessible to countries in the global south. Maybe through, we are looking at blended finances, blended financing, for example. So we are having grants, concessional loans, that if it must be loans, instead of the traditional loans, okay, and also private investments. And this would help developing countries to focus more on sustainable development. So it's not a case of it's not a case of when resources are coming in, resources can be effectively allocated towards sustainable development, towards climate adaptation, climate resilience projects and all, which has been which has been the norm for a while now.
All right, I think your connection is a bit hazy at the moment, so we'll just pause on your submission and go back to Honorable Terseer. You are, if I get this correctly, an advocate for improved funding to support climate change mitigation, and you've done some work in this aspect in your constituency as a representative. I'm curious as to your thoughts on the increased grant-based climate finance rather than the loans. That is one of the objectives, and it's been extensively discussed. Where do you stand on this, and what would be your submission to those who are speaking on behalf of the continent at COP29?
Yes, quite honestly, I don't believe that Nigeria should take any loans for climate change adaptation and mitigation issues. These are very important issues that require financing, no doubt about it. But if we're going to be working through the global financing framework, then there's no reason why we should take loans. There's been issues of assessing these grants over the years, and I think a lot of the problem also lies with the countries in the global south who want to assess the loans but who are unable to put together bankable projects that can be presented at these global forums and then the funding assessed for it. For example, last year I was at COP28 and I was at the Nigerian pavilion for the entire period of the COP. And, to be honest, we didn't see any projects that was designed and presented ready for financing. And so we came back from COP and it's been a full year. Now we're at the second COP and we've assessed not even $1, apart from maybe the Development Bank of Nigeria, who has done quite a bit of work, who was able to assess some money 2 years ago.
Okay, Honorable, don't lose your thoughts, but I just want to interject here and ask you, it's been 1 year and there was no tangible project that could motivate more action. I mean, doesn't this, give some credence to criticism that such meetings don't really push the needle when it comes to ways of combating climate change?
No, well, but there's been other countries that have assessed the funds around Africa. I know that Kenya, South Africa, Senegal, a couple of them have assessed some funding, but Nigeria has assessed next to nothing. And like I said, I want to also put the blame on us because, like last year at COP, we didn't present any project that was bankable, and we've not accessed any funding. But this year, I have taken steps. Like you said, I come from a constituency that's highly affected by farmer-header conflicts, and we were looking at ways or looking for solutions to this problem. And we're able to draw a nexus between climate change and the mass migration taking place up north, the drying up of the Lake Chad, and how this has forced herdsmen to migrate down south and led to conflicts with farmers who are predominantly crop producers. So we've come up with, we went ahead to produce a documentary on climate conflict in the country and how climate change exacerbates this problem. The documentary has received a good acclaim. We launched it a few months ago, and now the documentary is going to be screened at COP29 at a few pavilions. We've also designed the concept notes for what we want to achieve, how we want to achieve it, and how sustainable we're going to make this work with practical guides and financing models that we hope that will be appealing to the Nigerian Council on Climate Change, and will also be appealing to the global, the Green Climate Fund, which is the biggest fund for climate mitigation and adaptation in the world. So I have taken steps to present a project, present a model, a bankable model that Nigeria can adopt. We've also taken steps to produce a documentary to properly highlight this problem and showcase the depth of the problem. So I think that if we have more of such initiatives that specifically lay out bankable specific projects that can be funded by these global funds, we may be on the right track to accessing some of the funds that we so dearly need.
In my introduction, sorry again. In my introduction, I talked about the fact that academics are advocating for a more united front for African countries, and you are explaining what Nigeria, has presented. Again, it begs the question. The climate change issue is not unique to Nigeria. Yes, we will have our issues to raise and our projects to bring, but what about a continent-wide action plan by leaders to push for a more collective action for combating climate change in Africa?
Yes. Africa has a collective negotiating platform called the African Group of Negotiators. We had a pavilion last year at this year, and so a lot of work is going on alongside the other African countries. There's an agenda that has been put forward for this year. I'm not too familiar with the details of it right now, but I know that African countries have come together to negotiate as a bloc. But outside this, Nigeria is a big country. Our problems, our population, and the challenges we face sometimes can overshadow a lot of the issues that some of the smaller countries face. And it is important that as much as we negotiate collectively with the African continent, we also need to strategically position ourselves for our own self-interest and our own unique issues that affect us greatly here in Nigeria. For example, many of the African countries, or some of the African countries, are more interested in coastal erosion. Some are more interested in the flooding, the coastal flooding. Some are more interested in protecting their biodiversity and their wildlife, which we are also interested in Nigeria. But what is our most pressing climate change problem in the country? Certification, drought. This is what we presented at COP28. I think this is what also going to play a prominent discussion, talking point for Nigeria at COP29. And then we have issues of agriculture, erratic rainfall. So we have to negotiate as a unique individual country as well as negotiate collectively with the African continent.
All right. Ruth, let me come back to you and just ask specific mechanisms that African countries can propose to increase grant-based climate finance at the ongoing COP29. And if perhaps you have successful examples to portray this grant-based climate finance initiative in Africa that we can actually scale up.
Please, can you emphasize I missed your last point.
Okay, I'm asking you for specific mechanisms that African countries can propose at COP29 to increase grant-based climate finance.
Okay, I thank you for the question. I think the first one should be the equity in climate finance. It's something that countries in the global south really have to emphasize, given the fact that industrialized nations, countries in the global north, have contributed the most to climate change over centuries. And unfortunately, they are the least affected by, the effects of climate change. So I believe that one of the things that we should really present is that's emphasizing this historical responsibility that these countries in the global north should take responsibility, particularly as it concerns their financial commitment to support Africa's adaptation without the debt implication, because that debt implication, if it's put there, once that is inserted, it makes a mess of the whole thing. It's more like we'll just spend the resources in repaying the debt without really investing in sustainable development. And another thing that we should present is like equity-based finance structures. Okay, I talked about it earlier. That's prioritizing grants, debt forgiveness over traditional high interest loans. And then there is something that Honorable talked about that I would really want to, still emphasize in answering your question, which is that's capacity building and technical assistance. One of the reasons why it's as though countries in the global south are a bit disadvantaged when it comes to accessing finance for climate change is because we don't really have viable climate projects that will qualify for global funding mechanisms. So there needs to be a lot of green sector trainings that the technical and financial skills that are required to navigate application process for these loans that are often lacking. We need to train manpower respect to this. And then also another thing that we need to also focus on, which some countries, like he mentioned, some countries in Africa have already done something like that and have been able to access funds. Respect to enhancing our financial management skills. So some funds have been released at certain times, but if it is necessary to enhance financial management skills of those that are going to be in charge of this.
Okay, Ruth, let me interject here because I'm told we need to go on a very short break, but I would like you to hold on to that thought. When we come back, we'll be exploring how we can upskill skills in the green sector, and I will come back to you as well on the loss and damage funds, where we are at currently and how we can improve on it. Honorable, I still have more questions for you, how we can balance climate change mitigation with economic development. That is after the break. Don't go away. You're still here. We're discussing climate change as a result of the ongoing COP29. What is in it for Africa? And we're focusing on climate financing, why Africa shouldn't be borrowing to address climate damage that it did not cost. Okay, cost rather. I have my guests complete now. We have Onyenkachi Anumata joining in. He is the Executive Director, Ecoverse Green Initiative. Thank you for joining us. Onyenkachi, if you can hear me, can you confirm?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, from the previous session, we still have member, House of Representative, Terseer Ugbor, and Ruth. We have Ruth Soronnadi, a climate policy consultant. Thank you all for giving us your time on one slot. Now, before that break, I did mention I will be coming back to you on the issue of the Loss and Damage Fund. It has been a critical discussion at successive COPs, like you have impressed on us. And then they've said that some progress have been made in the last two COPs to create the fund. What is the current update on that, and how will African countries, in your view, push for increased support for this?
Is that for me?
No, it's for Ruth, please. Ruth, did you get my question?
Oh, okay. Yes, I believe I did. You asked what is the current situation with respect to loss and damage fund, and then how can we push for it, right?
Okay, we have a hold back with your audio. I'll just have you hold on for a bit. If you got the question, just hold on to your thoughts. You will speak to us on it subsequently. But let's bring Onyenkachi in and just talk about your opening thoughts on the ongoing COP29 and the push for more grants as against loans that increases Africa's debt when it comes to climate change.
Okay, so very quick one. For me, I will come from a different perspective. So it all boils down to the intentionality of the purpose of whatever funds you're receiving. The whole essence of fund is to help put in measures that will be of on a positive contribution to whatever development purpose that funds will be used for. But for me, I also strongly believe that it is also quite better to go in for grants, in the sense that we have seen a lot of funds for here and there, but the whole essence of it is we need to also understand the essence of requesting for the funds. So we have seen countries that have been able to access some of these funds and been able to utilize it. And then we have also seen put that into use. So we need to understand that as a continent, Africa, we contribute 4% of the global greenhouse emission. And then we also understand that it affects, the whole effect of this climate change, look at the floods, the heat waves, and the droughts. And then if we go to these whole measures, we can see that, take example from Kenya. There was a time Kenya was affected with the droughts, and they had to borrow millions of, money to, millions to be able to fund their water infrastructure. And we also know that if you go to Ethiopia also used funds from the Green Climate Fund to launch a climate resilient agricultural program. And then I will also make reference to Senegal. Senegal also, they were able to access International Climate Fund due to the bureaucracy, and they ended borrowing for flood prevention projects. Then there was also a part that I read about German GS. Namibia also got funds from the German, grants from Germany. These funds were used for renewable energy. The essence of this COP is to, we see problems, we see solutions. But as a country or as a continent, why are you attending the event? Are you attending for the interests of your country or continent? And you see, when we attend events like this, we go with a plan, we're strategic. So are we going there to get funds? Are we going there to get partners? Are we going there to acquire and also collaborate with other countries that are doing better in the fight against climate change? Now, at the end, just like the speaker that was speaking before, before you went on a break, you need to understand that a lot of time we we attend events like without proper planning. And so because of that, you're not able to assess quite a number of, you're able to assess quality funds that can help in terms of project implementation back home, either as a country or as a continent. But we also understand that the whole essence of this is countries are coming together to provide solutions. There have been, there are a lot of fundings. I think, was it I can't remember the one that happened in Dubai. And a lot of countries pledged towards the climate change. But how many of those funds are available? And even the funds that are available, how many have been able to access it? So we need to look at how we can strategically, with an intentional, requests that will help as a nation or as a country access the funds for. There are a lot of projects that we can look at. Right now, we can see that because, let me give an example with our country recently, we've been having issues of the lights in the national grid here and there because we have one. We are all depending on the one source of power. But when we have alternative energy supply, now we can also understand that the load that is on that national grid will be reduced. So we need to start looking at how we can start producing find alternative power supply. We understand that there are, like, for instance, countries in Europe, majority of them use renewable energy, and then we're privileged to be in the part of the world where we have good sunlight. I think we should start looking more on how we can utilize the solar power supply, renewable energy, and then we can see how this can, benefit a whole lot. So for me, I feel the whole essence of this COP is to support countries that are not really doing well in terms of the climate, the climate change, providing solution towards the climate change. We know that we're recently been intentional with this, but we also need to find out understand the supply chain of this whole climate change. And then we need to also understand that beyond the fundings, we also need to have partners. So going to COP for me, it's something positive because I believe it's an opportunity to connect. It's an opportunity to be able to, have global partners and also have opportunity to access quality funds that we can use for local projects.
To judge for the past 2 minutes. Honorable, I want to come back to you to get your perspective. He's not so optimistic as to the reason why Africa is there. I know I did say earlier that I was going to come to you about how Africa can balance the climate change mitigation efforts with economic growth. But before that, I'd like you to explain for us quickly what the polluter pays principle means and how is Africa leveraging this? Is there something to be said in this regard at COP29? And of course, you're free to respond to Onyenkachi's submission.
Okay. Well, first of all, the polluter pays principle is a very basic and simple global principle that has been applied and has become the standard for responsibility towards climate mitigation, towards pollution, environmental management, and things like that. It's also similar to the extended producer responsibility principle that requires that every company or every country that contributes a certain amount to global warming should pay an equivalent amount of its pollution, for the managing of the waste or the pollution or the problem that we're facing as a result of that activity. It has been applied successfully at certain, I'll say, micro scale by companies, by individuals, but it hasn't been applied successfully at the global stage, at the global level. So countries like the US, who are the biggest polluters and the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world, are not paying enough to solve this problem and are not supporting the fund enough. And of course, the politics, in the U.S. and the change of governments and the back and forth as regards the relevance of the Paris Agreement to their own economy. And so they put the economy interest ahead of the environmental interest in a lot of cases when government changes. And this is a problem that you cannot run away from, even for us in Nigeria, because the truth of the matter is, if you don't support people's economic well-being and the sustenance of their livelihoods, then obviously they're not going to they're not going to play by the rules in terms of conservation or protection of the environment and things like that. So it's important that both principles go hand in hand. If you want people at the micro level or at the macro scale or even at the global scale to contribute effectively towards climate mitigation and adaptation, then you have to take a look at the economic factors involved and how does this improve or lessen the economic viability of these communities or of the countries involved. And that is why you see a lot of the back and forth taking place all the time. You talked about the economic aspects of it and why and how these things work. And of course, like I just said, it's important that if the transition to renewables, if the transition or the effort to meet our nationally determined contributions go against our economic development, our urgent need to improve the livelihoods of our people economically, then obviously going to be difficult for us to get people to adopt to the changes that need to be done to create a real change and for us to move closer towards meeting our own targets in the country. Or for example, firewood, trees. We're cutting down trees. Nigeria is one of the highest users of firewood for cooking. Over 80% of our population still depends on firewood for cooking. And so if you don't provide alternative means like gas, you don't provide alternative means like clean cook stoves, and other sources of cooking, even with electricity, then people are going to continue to depend on firewood. And this is going to continue to lead to cutting down of trees, which is going to continue to lead to the change in our climate, and the effects of this will be felt all around us. So it's important that the alternatives are there, that the transition is fair, and countries in the industrialized countries have to realize the importance of this work and have to also take their work seriously in terms of their own contributions to the global climate challenges that we're facing, and take concrete steps towards contributing a fair share and making the access to this finance as easy as possible. But like I keep saying, countries like Nigeria also need to take concrete steps, also needs to plan better and plan ahead when we're attending these conferences, because we go for conferences. I was at UNGA recently, and it was like the same story. I was at COP last year, it was the same story. So I hope we've learned some of the lessons, like the other person just spoke, has mentioned several African countries that have been able to access grants. Nigeria is not one of them because we have not planned properly and we have not set ourselves up properly to be a leader in the climate discourse in Africa. We've not set ourselves to take any kind of role, to play a proper and prominent role in the climate discourse around Africa. And so a lot of times we miss out on these opportunities. And this has pushed some of us to take individual steps towards presenting actionable and concrete projects and programs that can be funded. And I'm hoping that with the partnership we have with the Development Bank of Nigeria, who has just been accredited to play a major role in helping Nigeria access the Green Climate Fund, I hope that in the next 1 or 2 years, Nigeria will greatly benefit from these global funds.
Ruth, I'd like to take you on. We're time pressed now, so I wanted to speak on the drought, should I use that word, of green talent to help with the green efforts. What's your thinking here? What needs to be done to improve skills in the green energy sector?
Thank you, Felicity. So just as Honorable said, for us to rightly position ourselves for funding respect to this, we need to invest in green sector capacity building. And one of the ways we can do that is having this renewable energy trainings, having programs in renewable energy such as solar and wind, and it should be extended to technical and vocational training institutes. I also believe that even in our secondary schools, in our universities, these things should be incorporated in the curriculum. And then we could also work with international organizations to have these trainings in technical and vocational institutes, and also encouraging private sector to invest in green jobs and technology. Nigeria can, through that, drive growth in industries like sustainable agriculture, ecotourism, waste management, and then maybe offering tax incentive for companies that would invest in green technologies and in the training of manpower for this. Because the more you are exposed to this, the more you acquire knowledge on this, the more you'll be able to structure projects that would be able to access funding available under the Green Climate Fund. And I also believe that the government could also bring in, through policy reforms and supportive infrastructure, this can also be achieved. Infrastructure like research hubs, innovation incubators, and green technology zones can also create, a supportive environment for green entrepreneurship and skill development. And then I would still emphasize again, we cannot overemphasize the partnership with organizations like IRENA, maybe International Renewable Energy Agency, the UNEP, bilateral agreements with nations excelling in green tech, can facilitate skill transfer in our nation. And also this is now the government's having those exchange programs and collaborative projects would allow Nigerian professionals to, gain first-hand experience with respect to green technologies and practices. I believe with this. One more thing. I also believe in investing in localized community-focused green projects. I know a number of NGOs do things like that, planting of trees, that's the reforestation, water management. So investing in this community-based green projects can also, and also sustainable agricultural training can drive green grassroots capacity building, and this would make us have more projects, green projects that would better position us in conversations, climate conversations, and in funding, in application for funding respect to climate change projects. Doing all of this, investing in all of this would help us to, access funding for climate change, climate resilience, climate adaptation when such funds are available.
All right, let's go to Onyenkachi. A new study just revealed that from 2050, Africa will suffer from food and water security and a massive loss of jobs in agriculture, unless, of course, something more drastic is done to change mitigation measures. How can Africa hold developed countries accountable for climate finance commitments made, for instance, the COP29?
We can start by holding them accountable by reminding them about their promise. I understand there was a 100 billion pledge. We also need to ensure that by holding them accountable, we need to present ourselves that we're ready to contribute. We're ready to be encouraged, because we also need to understand that we cannot just hold them accountable when we don't have a clear plan, clear roadmap. So agriculture is something that we have to be intentional about. We also understand that it's not just the effect of climate change that is affecting agriculture. We also need to talk about the insecurity. Insecurity is part of the insecurity is part of the concern that we also need to look at. So I also would like to address, as much as we're addressing the climate change, sorry to digress, we also need to address the part of the insecurity. Now, we need to understand the complete value chain, that's one. Then the stakeholders. We need to form an alliance where we speak in one voice. Because when we have individual countries to countries going on their own to say, okay, we are ready for this, we may not really acquire much. But as a continent, we need to speak in one voice.
Okay, I think that has been, Onyenkachi, I hope you can hear me this time.
Yes.
I think that has been established, that there is a need for African countries to speak with one voice. I think the crux of my question is, how can we hold developed countries, those that make pledges at COP29, how can we hold them accountable,
so we can hold them accountable
for their commitments?
First, we need them to simplify this process, the process of assessing the funds, because we holding them accountable. We need to remind them that, number one, we are not, as much as we talk about this whole climate change, we only contribute as a continent 4%. So we need to hold them accountable by making them understand the effects that they have caused. And then we also need to hold them accountable by letting them know that they need to also simplify the process of assessing the climate funds. And then we need to, the reforming financing rules, to prioritize the vulnerable nations. Holding them, then there should be also, it's not just about during the COP, but there should be consistent roundtable discussion. There should be room for, there should be continued processing conversations, and then through the conversations, we don't just have to wait until when we have the next COP, and then we talk about our effects and what we want. We need to also keep communications open, and then by holding them accountable to is by us also doing our own, because the truth is, we're not just holding them accountable because we have the negative effects of whatever that has happened. But from our end too, we need to also be ready. Yeah.
All right. All right, Honorable, I have one question for you specifically, and it has to do with, you talked about what Nigeria is proposing to, the climate conversation and projects that we wish to embark on. But there was a commitment made towards attaining net zero emission by 2060. This was promised at COP29 in Glasgow in 2021. Where is Nigeria with that commitment? I mean, we just experienced a very terrible flooding situation up north, and we still expect some flooding in the coming days.
Yes, we made a commitment to get to net zero by 2060. But before we get to net zero, we also made this commitment was, came with some conditions from the international community. The only way we can get to net zero is if we get the necessary support that we need from the international community, which as of now, we're not getting. So getting to net zero may be, a difficult task. But more importantly, I want to talk about the green bond. Nigeria also has some steps it can take to begin to show more commitment and also to put our money where our mouth is as regards to climate change mitigation and adaptation. We had proposed that the government should issue the green bond, the third green bond for Nigeria, where we can raise money locally to implement some of the programs and projects that we need to implement, to show the commitment and to show the seriousness as a country that we're willing to actually put our own money into the programs that we so dearly need to do. And I'm happy to say that, yes, we have set the ball in motion. The Ministry of Environment has set the ball in motion under the Green Bond Secretariat to raise about 60 billion naira or 100 billion naira next year for the green bond to finance green projects. But you know what?
Honorable, I'm sorry to interject.
I'm sure we can achieve more.
But I'm told we're out of time for this conversation. My apologies. I have to say here, thank you very much, Honorable Terseer Ugbor, Member House of Representatives in Nigeria, for the insightful contribution to Onslaught. Also, thank you, Onyenkachi Kingsley Anumata, Executive Director of Ecoverse Green Initiative. You joined us from Abuja. And the other lady in this conversation, Ruth Soronnadi, lead. Thank you for joining us. All right, dear viewer, this conversation is only possible because of you. You can watch this and other episodes of Onslaught on News Central YouTube channel. Don't forget to leave a comment. Until next time, stay safe.